Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Caster Calls with Zombie Grub. I am here with Anna Prosser, which I'm sure many of you StarCraft fans will recognize, but of course, just kind of all over the video game world. You've done so much. I mean, of course, I know you from StarCraft, but I think everyone knows a little bit about your history. And then since StarCraft, obviously, you've done a lot of work across the board, I guess, with Twitch. I saw that you're going to go to Pokemon Worlds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So, yeah, just general video game stuff, right? So, very happy to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. My pleasure.
We always start off with the history, the tale of Anna Prosser. So, you're gonna give us a rundown of how you got into video games and how you got into esports. That would be great.
Sure. I've always kind of been someone who loved to perform, and I feel like that's one of the things that I was just like born having to offer. My mom always tells the story about how she used to like sit me in the middle of the living room floor and like make me talk as a baby because it was like what I liked to do before I could even walk, apparently. Um, so that led me to a lot of stage things, and ultimately, I think my dream job was to be like a film and Broadway actress who was also a Goodwill ambassador for the UN. And my thought was like, I'm never going to be that, but like if I can take one small step toward that every time I move somewhere in a career, then that will make me happy. And so what that looked like was I at some WCG with Evil Geniuses before StarCraft 2 even came out. They wanted to do video interviews and they didn't have anyone assigned to do that. They were just going to have, I think, like a manager doing it. And I was like, I'll do it. Just put me on camera. So that was my first actual performance in esports, was just jumping in front of a camera at a WCG, and then eventually got hired. My first hired job was I got a full plane ticket as my payment to go to I think it was another WCG, Dallas, to do interviews for Team Liquid. So that was my first
Hmm.
esports gig, and from there, um, just did as much as I could to kind of be a storyteller in the space, because I was never going to be somebody who was good enough at playing video games to be competitive, and I really didn't care too much about being competitive. I just really loved the stories that people had to tell and the way that they really brought people together. I think that becoming into the StarCraft realm, and especially being part of Team Liquid early on, where it was a forum that even when I wasn't talking about video games, like one time I was raising money for charity, and all these gamers were like, cool, we know how to do that, and came in, like crashed the charity site and raised all the money within 10 minutes. So it was kind of this feeling of, these are a bunch of people from around the world who like solving problems and finding commonality, and they're very powerful and very cool, and they like something that I like, which is video games. um, so yeah, I mean, I started hosting and things. I ended up getting hired by Evil Geniuses to be their facility operations manager at the Evil Geniuses lair in Arizona, which was the first, at least as far as any of us knew, the first team house in North America. And then I started following people around with a little point and shoot camera, and that ultimately became the media department of Evil Geniuses, which then became Evil Geniuses Alliance, and then became Good Game Agency, which was then sold to Twitch, which was acquired by Amazon right before that. So I ended up moving through that space into becoming the lead producer for Twitch Studios with Marcus Graham, DJ Wheat, as the head of Twitch Studios, and worked there for 5 years, and then also did esports hosting on most weekends, and also did a lot of streaming at night. And then in 2020 decided to finally take the leap and just only do freelance. So I've been doing freelance production for a lot of shows, mostly Dungeons and Dragons shows these days, and I host a lot of gaming related or geek adjacent type of things, usually live on the internet streams, but also a little like commercial here and there or whatever. Um and I play live Dungeons and Dragons. That's my only, like I said, I'm not much of a competitive gamer, but that's the only thing where I'm like, I'm good at that game. I can play that game professionally. I can do that one.
Like to see a professional player of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was a great overview of your career. I did not know actually that you had your start very, very beginning start for Team Liquid. That's actually kind of cute.
Yeah, I
Um,
know, right?
just because EG versus TL was one of the biggest rivalries to really kickstart
Oh, yeah.
esports.
Fun fact, actually, I don't know if all of us old esports fogies can gather around for a minute. If you remember the Liquid Rising documentary,
Yes, yeah.
and then Evil Geniuses made our Geniuses Falling
Yeah.
video, that was me. I made
Oh, did you?
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great. I mean, that control gif is still used all the time. That was the one where he has like glasses on. He's like shaking his head,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yep.
That was actually very, very fun. There was a ton of things that EG did really well. Certainly that they, in fact, they did so well. They created almost the villain, not because of the players they hired, which also was definitely a case, but
Yeah.
also because that they went mainstream, right?
Hmm.
Because remember that
Hmm.
was absolutely one of the points of contention, is that Team Liquid is homegrown. Everyone's so
Yeah.
pleasant and nice.
Yeah.
And then EG is like, well, we're gonna actually make money, so
Yeah.
you're welcome. so
Yeah.
was there anything else? Like, I mean, because I remember gosh, I remember like the weightlifting videos, kind of just like
Hmm.
tours
Hmm.
around the house, like what the daily schedule was like. All of that was you.
Yeah. I mean, if to be honest, if there is a chip on my shoulder, it's that I worked really, really hard to kind of make video happen for Evil Geniuses, even when most of the powers that be were like, there is no reason for this. We're not paying you to do this. You can do it on your own free time if you want to, but we don't see any value in it. So the Evil Geniuses Lair video and the weightlifting video are actually two of the first ones that I was like, I'm going to show you how valuable this is. And they're still some of the most highly viewed ones on the YouTube channel. So that's my little like, haha.
Nice.
um, but yeah, we made those. We made a lot of. There were a lot of times because, like you said, Evil Geniuses was really good at being like, who can we partner with and how can we make this profitable? So there were a lot of times where they would come and be like, SteelSeries wants to promote a new headset, and here's the things about it. Can you make a funny video that seems like it's just for the fun of content, but also includes this thing? Like, can you speak the language of people who want to watch StarCraft? And that was really, really fulfilling. It was really fun.
Do you have
There's a lot
any?
of great stories.
Yes, yes, we'll definitely talk about some of that storytelling via media. But I just, the last concert related question: did you have any hand in the whole like I guess it was the HyperX videos where like intro through the keys of the guy and took his coffee?
Oh yeah, I think I made those. What were they? The
I'm pretty sure they're for HyperX. So like the Idra one, he like they're talking about him. And he's like, I don't think he's like as pompous as people say. Then he rolls up in like a Mustang. And he gets out of
Oh
a
no, I
car.
didn't make those. Those were
Okay.
HyperX made those, which we had
Okay.
a really
Okay.
close relationship with them. Those were amazing because that was one of the first times people really put like actual budget
Yeah.
and a full film like crew into making stuff. Because for contrast, it was me and another person at the Evil Geniuses Lair who would like hold a camera and direct everyone and edit things together on our own. But that was a full like they actually had a director and a DP
Oh,
and
okay.
multiple camera people and a makeup department and
I was
all
gonna
that
say it
stuff.
definitely was like a better camera, but I mean, I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
the
I was
budget
thinking
amount
you
of
were
it.
talking about one that we made. We made one at one point where we had Machine doing a dramatic reenactment as Idra, and we had him like smash a keyboard and the keys went flying, and
Okay, I
it
kind of
was a
remember
play
that.
on the fact that everyone would constantly mistake Machine for Idra at one point for some reason.
That's bringing up some like real like past dug deep
Yeah.
memories right now.
Uh-huh.
That's right. Yeah, that's so funny because it's so I could say that they couldn't be more different.
I know.
But okay, yeah.
They came
Um,
from the same era, I guess. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, both white guys with short cropped hair.
Yeah.
I don't
Exactly.
know.
Sometimes a little beard, yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. But that's awesome, and I feel like to you, what you said that they didn't think that they needed this. They didn't want to pay you for it. That was really a lot of like the first content. But the thing is that people, I don't know, they've kind of forgotten that that was some of the first content. I think on StarCraft Reddit in like 3 months ago, there was a whole new runaround of people showing those videos again. Saying,
Really?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, there's actually this whole theories. There is this thing, there is that thing, and people being like, "Gosh, StarCraft Two was a hell of a drug back then, basically,
It
right?"
was.
It was just the biggest thing. It was really the only thing. CS:GO was at that point, I guess, considered kind of a bad game, and
Mhm.
then it was freshened up and everyone liked it.
Mhm.
Dota hadn't kicked off yet. It was just such a different time. But
It was.
anyways, so you incorporate storytelling very quickly. I know that's something else that you kind of maybe glossed over, didn't even mention at all, was that you were Miss. Oh, hold on. Oh no.
Oregon, USA.
Oregon, damn it.
Yes.
Yes, I'm gonna be honest, I was like, it's one of those countries out west that I don't really know about.
Yeah.
It's like that's all I had.
Yeah, one
Um,
of those, Wild West
it's like,
places,
it's
yep.
not Wyoming, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Sorry. So anyways, so you had a lot of experience literally on camera and working with cameras, and I imagine through that, you actually had work like, with, like, broadcast crews, basically. So, like, how much of that really influenced, I suppose, your take on esports, right? Did you kind of like go from rather entertainment world to esports and be like, well, we got to freshen this thing up, we got to do this and that and this?
It's a really good question. Um, I think that pageants were really more a symptom than a cause for me, in that
Mm.
my entire educational background is I have 2 degrees, one in international studies and one in speech communication. So my whole thing is talking to people, helping people talk to each other, understanding people, all that kind of stuff. And pageants actually, I did Miss Portland when I was working on my thesis to finish my degree, and I was just like bored and sad, and one of my mom's friends was like, you should do Miss Portland, and I was like, ha, that's hilarious, and I will have lots of fun stories to tell after that, because I think it probably is like Miss Congeniality and full of vapid women, and um but it was super positive. The women were like extremely compelling and extremely community oriented, and saw me come in having no idea what I was doing. And like one of them gave me a dress, one of them stayed after to teach me how to walk, like all this stuff. So I have lots to say about pageants and how they're
Hmm.
widely misunderstood and all of that. But the point is, um, that experience was so positive that it kind of spurred me further into that speaking and listening and talking. And I actually would consistently win interview awards in pageant. So they have multiple different areas of competition, and one of them is that judges interview you. And because that was something that really got me the farthest in pageants, people would come to me for interview coaching. So my first business that I actually ran was as an interview coach. Um, and so that, even more than having been Miss Oregon, I think the fact that I had so much practice interviewing and being interviewed was what made it really easy for me to confidently be like, yeah, throw me on camera. I can interview anyone about anything. Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, definitely it translated, the experience at Miss USA translated quite a bit to, I have been in a high pressure TV camera environment, but pageants seem a lot more glamorous than they are, especially in Oregon. Nobody cares about pageants. So like, think more along the lines of like a hotel ballroom and one guy with a camcorder in that context. But at Miss USA, yes.
Okay. All right. Cool. That's actually fascinating. I mean, it really is a miscongeniality, by the way. Initially, she thought it was all vapid people, and
Exactly, yes.
and it was awesome. That's great. So you had stellar reviews for your interview role. So initially being the interviewee, but you,
Mhm.
I guess, kind of soaked in a lot of information, became a very good interviewer. Can you highlight some points as what makes you think that you're so good, or what you thought was good from the interviewers back in the day?
Sure. That's always funny because when I hear someone like, "Why do you think you're so good?" I'm like, "Oh no, no, I'm not." That is one thing where I'm like, I actually think I can point to enough work in my past of like, this is what I have based my life's work on. Um, I think a lot of what makes a good interviewer, unfortunately, is practice, because people are always like, "How do I get better at this part or that part?" One of the hardest things about being an interviewer is listening and thinking at the same time. So, thinking about what I'm going to say next and genuinely listening to what the person is saying at the same time. And that's a super hard thing to do. And I cannot instruct anyone on how to do it other than just practice it a bunch. Like,
Hmm.
listen to something and speak at the same time and try to remember both. Um, but I think philosophically, why I love interviews so much is I think an interviewer has to learn how to be a support, because when you're an interviewer, you're not really the most important piece of the content. You are trying to help the most important piece of the content be stellar, you know? So it can be really hard when you're somebody who loves performing and loves to be on camera, because you really want to mostly disappear, other than to ask just the right questions and guide the conversation in such a way that it moves so people remember, like if you think of Barbara Walters, for example, like everyone knows Barbara Walters because she asked such amazing questions and really brought out these incredible moments with the person she was interviewing. So I think learning how to be a support is really important. I think that the structure of an interview, a lot of people think like, okay, I need to do my research, I need to write my questions, and then I need to recite these questions and get the answers to it, and then the interview's over. Where I think if you're a really skilled interviewer, you have a more fluid idea of like, here are the topics that will probably spur a really good conversation. Here's where I want to start, and here's where I want to end. And I'm going to drive this car through all of these places, and I'm going to hit all these signposts, but I'm going to do it in whatever order this person organically takes me to. And I have a lot to say about like how to do that and structuring like what I call the perfect question or the perfect answer. And I teach workshops on that now and again. People hire me to come do that. So I have a lot of fun doing that. I have to stop
Yeah.
myself because otherwise I will just like take you through a workbook of like how to interview.
That's kind of the point of the podcast, actually. But I know that you've done some of the Twitch hosting workshops.
Mhm.
So I know Fear Dragon got a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
help from
Mhm.
that. Yeah. And I do think that when people think of you, I mean, maybe, well, I can't say people because I'm talking from the StarCraft 2 community. So maybe a bit from your past. I do think it's generally hosting, but then when I think of your overall career, I mean, some of those very important moments were like you interviewing very critical key people in the whole video game entertainment industry, like TwitchCon, for instance.
Mm.
So you're experienced in a lot of different ways of interviewing with a lot of different types of people. I'm going to ask one kind of maybe like random question that's not that important, and then I'll move on to something that's more important. But uh, just because you were talking about like how you track the interviews, which is absolutely all correct, and listening and thinking of a question at the same time. Did the fact that there was a translator for a lot of events in the early days of esports actually help you with that? Because you could listen and then think while or vice versa. Like you could think while the Korean person was talking, and then the translator would then force you to listen.
Yeah, I guess so. I originally, when you said the translator, I was going to be like, oh man, that's so hard having a translator because the starting and stopping and trying to keep
Uh,
a fluid feeling of like we're having a conversation
hmm
is very difficult with a translator. So, from a quality perspective, those interviews were not as fun for me. But in terms of having time to think, yeah, definitely. Because you have a whole like two sets of translations to decide whether what you just said was good or not and decide if you're going to ask a question. But yeah, in the flow of an interview, still once you get translated back what they said, you still have to respond immediately. You know what I mean? So
sure.
I guess it
Yeah.
depends.
Yeah. That was kind of like not really important question I had
I
thinking
like it. It's
about
a
it.
good question.
But yeah, so a little more important and very key to esports is that you interviewed a lot of people. So like I said, you've interviewed like some really important people. You've interviewed people who are very used to being interviewed. You've also interviewed the esports thing, the esports
Mm-hmm.
players that don't know how to be interviewed. Many of them have little to no media training. Most of them have no media training, but then many of them don't want to be on camera. That is the last thing they want to do. They just happen to play this
Yes.
video game. So, how did you work with that? Was that a shock to you initially? And how did you finagle your way into being a suave interviewer person who doesn't want to be interviewed?
That is such a good question because esports, especially in those early days, was notable for like you get nothing out of an interview, especially like um, through a translator. A lot of times, all you would get back is like, "I hope my fans enjoyed my match. Thank you. I played my best." No matter what you ask, that would be the answer. Um, so in those cases, a lot of times it's just kind of up to you to fabricate the excitement and to tell the story yourself. An example I have of that is I've interviewed a couple kids at different tournaments, like at the Pokemon tournament or one time at San Diego Comic Con, where you get a kid on camera and their mind is completely blank. And you don't want them to feel like you don't want to wait for them to speak because poor kid's going to just like break down crying. So you basically have to just start being like, how was the match? Was it good? It looked really fun. Did you practice really hard? And like just completely make the story for them to just nod at. Um,
Wow.
and so certainly StarCraft players are not children, but in a lot of cases, that's where I kind of had to go is like, I will be excited about this match because I watched it and I know what happened. And the crowd also knows what happened. So basically, I'm going to tell you what the crowd is excited about. And then you can say, uh huh. And that's enough, you know?
No, that's actually amazing though. I've never really considered that angle before. It is, as you said, what you kind of do with kids. You see it even without interviews being in the process. I think you see that from young teachers to young kids. But I'm even thinking, yes, I am applying it to full on adults, but who are
Hmm.
terrible interviewees.
Yeah,
I actually StarCraft has gotten better since you've
I
last
think
done
so.
it,
Yeah.
for sure. But I interviewed someone for a Valorant thing, and I had done a bit of studying for it was Game Changers, so I'd listened to a bunch of them speak, and I don't know, most of them were pretty excited to talk, and they had a lot of interesting things to say. This chick did not. So I asked her like a very, I think, softball question, which is like, you incorporate a new member into your team. How has that worked out? And she just was like, it's worked out really well. And I was like, "Oh, no."
Yeah.
I'm not used to the situation.
And
But, yeah, that's such an interesting way to do it is almost kind of you really do take a different, almost pacing to it, don't you? Because I
Hmm.
think the expectation for interviews is that especially when you're trying to make it, I suppose, like, a really good interview, you're asking them, like, really interesting questions, you're expecting a long pause or a
Hmm.
monologue, almost monologue. But, yeah, for those types of people, maybe I'm gonna try this next time. It's
I
already
think that
helped.
um a lot of times what I talk about in those interview or hosting workshops is like your job in that case is partly to help the person you're interviewing, but also mostly to just like keep the audience feeling comfortable, like
Mhm.
not let there be any awkward or uncomfortable things happening. So, like, in those situations, I think, like, okay, if this person's not going to perform, then I have to perform. So,
Mm.
here's what I've got. And it reminds me actually of this. I think one time at BlizzCon, I was doing like the floor reporting thing, and they had this robotic probe running around BlizzCon that would only beep, and they were like, "You're
Hmm.
gonna interview the probe." And I was like,
I don't
"How?"
remember
And
this
they
at
were like,
all.
"It doesn't matter, just interview it." So I literally just had a completely one-sided like, "Are you having fun at BlizzCon? Wow, that's a cool story." Like, just completely making up what they were saying in their mind. So,
Wow.
I guess you just that's I guess that's what I'm proud of as an interviewer is like you cannot shake me. I will not be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that is that's amazing. That sounds very difficult. It's kind of it reminds me of a thing that happened recently for a Sweden event where we had a little opening bit, which we never really do
Mm.
in StarCraft. But our producer at the time, she was really gung ho about making bits, and I think that's actually great because I think that one thing that does miss out on a lot of esports nowadays are clippable moments, basically. So I
Mm,
feel
mhm,
like talking
mhm.
to a probe would have been clippable.
Yeah, for
Maybe.
sure.
Maybe no matter what, maybe if you
Too
had
bad
done it
this was
terribly.
before TikTok. That could have
Ah,
been
damn,
famous.
yeah. We had to, like, they had the Jim Raynor, action figure on the desk, and they had a soundboard for him, and Wardy and I had to be like, "What do you think of today's games, Jim?"
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That'd
It
be
was
really
fun.
fun.
It was actually fun. 'Cause I love that it was different. It kinda set the tone as well. So on that topic, do you do anything, given an opportunity, I suppose, to that lets you have more of a rapport with some of these players or just interviewees in general? Any conversation beforehand, any quick question and answers to get things rolling?
Mhm. One of my favorite events was Heroes of the Dorm. It doesn't happen anymore, but it was a Heroes of the Storm tournament that was for college kids. And they did a really great job of. I actually requested that we have like media days beforehand, which is like fairly common in sports, but not very much so in esports. And especially because these are college teams, right? They change every single year. Nobody knows anything about them other than what they've done in the tournament so far. So getting to sit down with them and say, like, hey, what are the stories here? What are you concerned about? What are you excited about? What do you think your fans want to hear about? That's really what's most important for an interviewer. Um, and that was so cool because I think for a long time I kind of bought this, um, I guess what I would call a fallacy that came from early StarCraft, which was like hosts are just hosts, and then there's casters who are like the real talent. And that in the sense of like knowing the game and being able to give amazing analysis, that's absolutely true. But I think that I had kind of devalued my role as like, oh, I don't know enough about the game to cast, so I just host. But I did cast Heroes of the Storm to kind of prove that I
Oh, yeah.
could, and I realized like, oh, this is just a completely different skill set that I don't enjoy that much. Like I don't want to look at the charts of the numbers and analyze what this player's doing, and I don't care that much about build orders. Like it doesn't thrill me. But sitting down with a player and being like, why do you want to win this tournament? And him being like, well, if I win, I get to keep going to school. And if I don't, I might have to drop out. And my mom is here and I want to win this for her because if I don't win it, she's going to feel like she has to find a way to pay for my college and she's not going to be able to. Like, to me, that's like, this is what this tournament is about, you know?
Mm.
Sorry, my dog is screaming. Come here. Nope, she doesn't want to be in camera. But so yeah, I that was a very roundabout way to answer your question, that if I'm given the opportunity, yes, I love to sit down with the players beforehand. And if not, a lot of times I lean on casters to be like, hey, you've probably been casting this whole run. Who's a standout player? What stories are there that I can pick at that will play off of you, you know, because like you're watching this player, so you're really interested in them. So can I highlight them so that you can talk about them? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. Definitely good way to go is to have a media day. I wish that
Mm-hmm.
was more popular. And by the way, I do remember you and Gillyweed. Your first little
Yeah.
babby steps into Here's the Stormcasting.
Yes, our little Babby cast.
Yeah, it was so nice. So nice.
Thanks, Heroes Hype, for giving us
Yeah.
that platform.
Yeah. So you brought up, I think, an interesting point, which is that the value of the on-screen talent can be very weird because it really depends on who you think is doing the evaluation and all that good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, certainly you can do, I guess, an easier job of moving through video games. Kind of like stage host is like pretty easy to go through different video games, unless you disagree. Please stop me if you do. Then like maybe desk host is like a little
Totally.
bit tougher, and then play by play is a little bit tougher. And analyst just like, okay, well, if you're not 100% in this game.
Exactly.
Anyways, how what are your thoughts on that from the broadcast perspective? Like, do you actually think that the host brings a lot of value? I know I'm maybe asking you to say no. I don't know why people hire me.
Yeah, I don't know why I have a job.
Yeah, exactly. But especially for esports events as well, where I guess that is sometimes considered, whatever, whoever.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, just let's start with that, right? So what value do you think, how much value do you think that a good stage host brings to the event?
Well, I'm a host, but I'm also a producer. So I will say I do understand why sometimes, for whatever given event, a host is not the most important thing to add to your budget, you know? I think the most important thing is making sure your show is entertaining. It connects with the audience. The audience has memorable experiences that then they take away that make them want to watch again or remember it or whatever it is that you want them to do. So sometimes you don't have to have a host for that. I think generally having a host makes that a whole lot easier to make sure that the audience has I think what a host does is they reflect the audience back to them, because the host is the person who's like experiencing the event for the audience, and they get to ask the questions of the players that the audience wishes they could ask, and they get to be backstage to see what the audience wishes they could see or tell the secrets that the audience wishes they could know, so if the question is like, why have a host, or like, why is a host important, I think that it's for the audience and for the entertainment value. And then it's also, I think, for safety. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times when something goes south with a production and you need somebody to just pinch hit, like someone needs to be on stage doing something right now, a lot of times that's the host. So if you have a really, really good host, and that's, I think, what differentiates, because people often think like you just need to have someone up there holding a microphone and telling people what's going on. But the differentiator is if you have a really, really good seasoned host, you can be like, here, take this person, go on stage, talk for 10 minutes. Like, and they'll do that,
Yeah. It's a fascinating answer. Fantastic, considering the roundabout way I asked the question. So that's great. And do you think that's what really makes the best hosts versus the okay hosts, is their ability to, I suppose, improvise?
Yes. I think their ability to improvise, but I think that's also tied into their ability to understand an audience. Because you can improvise all you want, but if you don't understand who your crowd is and what they want, then that improvising is
Mm.
pretty worthless. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think I'm imagining some very terrible clipped moments from earlier esports events where hosts tried to be just a different style, honestly. Like, they might have been totally okay at a concert or something, but then the
Mhm.
esports audience was just not all about that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's why hosting in
yeah.
esports is so terrifying. They're very demanding and exacting about what they want,
Mm.
and if you don't give them exactly what they're expecting, then you can expect a lot of pushback.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that it's just it's not an esports crowd, it's a Dota crowd and a StarCraft crowd, and then even
Yeah.
country-wise, like,
Mhm.
for your last foray into StarCraft was in Leipzig, which is just
Yeah.
not much to work with.
Totally different, yeah.
Yeah, than, like, France, for instance, which has always had a fantastic crowd.
Mhm.
You also mentioned towards the beginning of this conversation that you're also a producer. Can
Mm,
you elaborate on that?
sure. Well, like I said, I was lead producer for Twitch Studios, so what that meant was anything that Twitch Studios was producing, whether that was like interviews at E3, like you mentioned, or a Comic Con show, or we did a lot of shows on Twitch for Twitch, or we would even do sometime we did Twitch Weekly every week. That was just like, here's what's happening on Twitch kind of stuff. So I was responsible for overseeing a lot of that and creating a lot of that and then making sure that it happened. And that was my only official producer title, but I think I was already doing that on Evil Geniuses as well.
Mm,
It just was like we didn't really at that point we didn't really have titles. I just kind of was always like Anna, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. I feel like the producer title is used for a lot of things, actually.
It is. It is.
It's
Yeah.
it's kind of
And yet
ambiguous.
nobody really knows what it means when you say it
Yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah, it's everything and nothing. Uh,
Mhm.
um, anyway, so how did that kind of more of like an overseeing role, right?
Mm.
Influence some of your on-camera work. For instance,
Mm.
watching other talent work, or even just like recognizing what was easier to hone in for the production side type of stuff.
That's a great question. Because getting to work on both sides really helps you understand what production needs from you as a talent and vice versa. Having worked as a talent really helps you understand what people need. Um, and I think that definitely watching other talents so much, you mentioned that, helped me become way more analytical about the why. Like, I
Mm,
don't think I would have had an answer for like, why is a host important, or what is the best thing that a interviewer can do. I don't think I would have had that answer before becoming a producer, at least not as well,
mm.
because as a producer I can see, okay, that host is giving me this, which is what I want and I need, so that must be really important. you know um so yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It does. Yeah. I guess what could be elaborated on is anything specific
Mm,
gained from it. So, when you say that helped production, or that really helped me as production, can you think of
mm.
anything in particular?
One of the most overarching things is I think that producers and talent often don't understand each other for energy reasons. Like, and what I mean is, as a talent, your energy is your currency. And if you run out of energy, you're not going to be able to do your job. So if you need a rest, you need a rest. And so a lot of times, sometimes talent will be asked for too much attention on a show. So what I mean by that is, for example, maybe I was just on stage and then I come backstage and I'm ready for my like 5 minutes of not talking and a snack and to stare at the wall, and someone's like, oh, please come meet our CEO. So then I'm like, oh, I need to be very on to meet the CEO, and then I need to spend my 5 minutes being really on and then go be on again, which is fine, but as a talent, that's hard. So a lot of times I would try to be like, okay, you're off stage, go away, I won't need you for like 20 minutes, you can go anywhere you want, like I won't talk to you and I won't let anyone talk to you. um, so that was an important thing. And then on the flip side, I think talent can feel like, okay, I'm working so hard, I'm on camera, everything's riding on my shoulders, and if production is not giving me what I need, then everyone's had their diva moment, right? And I think that learning more about production helped me realize that there is never any good time to get mad at your production
Mm.
crew for any reason, because it is not going to help you. It's not going to help them. Like, everyone wants this show to succeed. So you being diva or pissed off or whatever is not going to help. I mean, like, and on the flip side of that, also stating your needs very clearly and compassionately only helps. So being like, hey, I need to go stare at a wall for 5 minutes. I'm really sorry. Is that okay? Most production staff will be like, I got you, girl. Like, take, um, so I think in especially early days, or like whenever there's a young game that has new talent, I feel like I see that a lot, where talent specifically, are like,
Mm.
I don't understand why they're not giving me this thing I need. And I'm really pissed off, and I'm going to yell at the producer about it in our meeting. And then the producer's going to be very kind and understanding because they're the talent and they don't want to upset them. But I'm like, you don't need to do that.
Yeah, some amazing points there. First of all, energy as currency is an amazing phrase I haven't heard
I
before.
think I stole that from Rachel Quirico. She should get credit.
Oh, maybe she
Seltzer.
mentioned it on a podcast. Maybe I said that a year ago when I interviewed her.
Mhm.
It's an amazing phrase. But then also, I think, everyone's always says communication is really important, but I do think that specifically, yeah, that whole energy balance is really hard to communicate. So just kind of being as upfront as possible
Mhm.
is really important. And I think generally production does understand, but they're not really, they're doing a million things. They're not in tune
Mhm.
to what energy level the talent's going to be at. So exactly saying I need 5 minutes to look at the wall
Yeah.
is actually so helpful. And then final point, yeah, unfortunately, when it's been happening a little bit in StarCraft, the buck doesn't seem to stop anywhere anyways,
Mm.
unfortunately. You could be mad at the producer, you could be mad at the sound engineer, you could be mad at the convention center because they end at a certain time, you could be mad at the project manager who's not even there,
Mhm.
but they had to sponsor up, like it just goes on and on and on. So it sucks, and you want to find a way to fix things, but certainly getting angry it really doesn't do anything.
It can be hard because when you are a talent, people assume that you made all the decisions, right? Like, if
Why isn't the
something's
game
going,
starting?
yeah, exactly. So it can be really hard to be like shouldering all that burden when none of it's your fault. So I think that there is a time to go to production and be like, hey, my brand is at stake and I'm really
Mm.
uncomfortable with what's happening here, and here is what I want to change. That absolutely is appropriate. I think it's just doing that amount of accountability and consideration of being like, here is what I'm having a problem with. Here is the solution I have for you. How can you work with me to make sure that that solution happens? I think that people tend to maybe not do that work when they're in a really high stress environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find yourself, especially throughout the years, you've gotten more comfortable in every role that you've had? Do you find yourself finding like putting more importance on communicating, but helping, I guess, with the overall idea of the broadcast? Some of the other hosts that have interviewed have mentioned that one of the most integral things to their career is speaking with producers, saying, "I think this would be a
Mm.
good idea. I think this would be maybe not a great idea for the audience." Where do you, I guess, where does your how much value do you put on stuff like that?
I think that's a really tough line to walk.
Mm.
I absolutely think that talent often knows their audience the best. And so there are really good times to be like, hey, why don't we try this? Because I think the audience will love it and they'll be right and the producer will be glad, and all of that. Um, I think I recently was on a shoot where I was working with another talent and there were a lot of things going wrong with the broadcast. And so this talent kind of took over as producer and started like making changes, telling people what to do and everything, which maybe was necessary. And I chose not to do that because I felt like that wasn't my role.
Mm.
And having been a producer, it would have made me really uncomfortable if a talent was like, I think we should do this, and jumped in and just started making all of those changes. And I wouldn't have felt empowered to tell them not to, because you have to keep your talent happy. So I felt uncomfortable with that. The producers said that they were very glad, and they were like, you saved us. Thank you for coming in and basically producing, even though you were only supposed to be talent. So who
Mm.
knows whether I was just being like, oh, green-eyed monster and jealous of this person who was getting all the praise, or whether I was right not to step in. I don't know.
Mm.
So I guess the answer is like, I think it is really good to share ideas and to be really sensitive to when it is helpful, especially in terms of timing and space, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. I think also
I know that's
knowing.
kind of a non-answer, but
Well, I do think it's an important answer though, because I would say generally, I think Shocks also, I'd love to have her on the podcast, but I know she tweets about stuff like this all the time. And she's also
mm,
said similar things. Really, what's propelled her career is her interactions behind the scenes.
mhm,
But absolutely, the first time I thought about this, I was like, well, is there overstepping? There must be.
mhm, mhm.
So I think knowing your producer also can be
Yeah.
very helpful, right? So again, the producer we had, she was very open. She was like, "No, give
Mhm,
me ideas,
mhm,
please."
mhm.
But other maybe would not have been. Maybe they'd be like, "Yeah, thanks. Okay, go away."
I think
Uh,
that asking up front too is always like being able to say, "Hey, I have an idea. Is now a good time to mention it to you?" is always like
hmm.
a really nice way to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good point.
I guess also I think that maybe this is also coming from a little bit of a place of like this talent that I was working with is a peer of mine, and I was feeling very protective of them. And I was like, you are being paid to be a talent. You're not being paid to be a
Ah,
producer. And that's a really hard and important job. And you're being stressed out by that. And they should pay you a lot more money because you're doing that and this,
yeah,
which ultimately is up to them. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with how hard you got to work to get paid, you know?
yeah. Well, that's a really important point that I will explore. It is kind of funny listening to you talk about these things. And especially whenever you say like you got to keep your talent happy, because sometimes in esports it feels like that is definitely not the main goal.
Yeah.
So yeah, in an ideal world, we would be treated like the divas we are. No,
hmm
we treat
It
maybe a
really
little bit
does
better.
depend on the broadcast. That's a really good point. And how long the broadcast has been running too
Yeah,
also.
it's also 15-hour days.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, you mentioned that, and I think it's absolutely good point. It's kind of weird. We get to I don't know what I'm gonna explain, trying to get my thoughts out. You said that you were protective of them not, doing all this extra work because that's not what they're paid for. And I think to some people out there, especially to the people who are, putting so much work in and they're doing literally everything, because that's
hmm
so much of what beginning work is, and especially in esports and freelance, they're going to be like scoff. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Totally.
being paid for one thing, you only have to do that one thing. That's so,
Yeah.
privileged of you. Um, but the more that I talk to people who work in a kind of like a broader sense of the scene, they work in multiple games, they work in basically bigger productions, honestly. And the more entertainment like it gets, the more that everyone starts to agree. They're like, no, 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 you are talent. Like, I love that you're helping me, but please, like, this is
Mhm.
taking away your
Mhm.
energy and all that type of stuff. Um, anyways, from this, I am curious about your thoughts about like how much it is important to, I suppose, mimic the entertainment industry in that way.
Mm.
Uh,
Mm.
yeah, I guess if you have an answer right there from that, that would be nice because I'm not sure I could give a more pointed question. Just kind of a general air of, is it better to be that way, or are we losing our grassroots esports scene?
It's so like I mean, this is coming from literally a producer who just did hours upon hours of work for a show that I was promised I'd get paid for, and then the show got canceled and they ghosted me and I didn't get paid. Like, this
Oof.
is, I can talk a big talk, but I still do it. Like, everyone still does it. And when you really love something and you want it to be good, and even when you just love this line of work and you love making content, um, it can be really hard to be like, actually, I deserve to be paid for this, and I shouldn't do it unless you're going to pay me.
Hmm.
Um, so I had that conversation with myself where I was like, you said you wouldn't do this anymore. Like you tell people not to do this. You're still going to do it. And ultimately, the answer to my question for me was like, if they ghost me, I would still be glad I did this. Like I would rather do this even if I don't get paid. So sometimes I think it's worth it is the answer. I
Mm.
think the other answer is I'm speaking from a place of certain privilege in that I've been doing this job for so long that I can be reasonably sure I have other jobs to fall back on if I offend someone by asking for money. And I can be a little bit more like squared shoulders about like, if you're offended by me asking for money, then I don't want to work with you, which I couldn't have done a certain number of years ago. You know, at that point, it was like, I will take what you offer me because I have to work to get the experience and the exposure in order to get more work. So I think I made a lot of decisions early on in my career that I now would advise people, yeah, Niski, would advise people not to do. um,
They're getting angry at you for taking all those,
yeah,
unpaid jobs.
Niski, come here. Hold on. Dog on podcast is always a good thing, right?
Yeah. I
There you go.
actually know it's amazing. There you go.
Thank you.
Everyone listening, turn into the video right now.
It's a really cute dog, I promise.
He's very cute. Or she.
So
They're very cute.
anyway, to sum up what I was rambling and saying is, I think it is really important to ask to get paid and to weigh what's most important to you in each situation.
Yeah.
And not fault yourself for whatever is most important to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, being paid for the appropriate job is obviously the biggest one. But, I'm even thinking of some of the smaller battles that have to happen, especially in esports, like having healthy food available
Oh
for
my gosh.
catering. Well, yeah, aren't you vegetarian?
I'm a vegetarian and I don't eat dairy, which
Okay.
is a combo for catering that is impossible to
Yeah.
understand.
I recall you in Fear Dragon having like a little
Yeah.
like bonding moment. Yes.
The amount of soggy zucchini we have both eaten is high.
Yes. And then also just like yeah, as we said before, kind of those moments where you can just stare off into the wall and you're not just constantly being worked to death. It's such a hard conversation to have with anyone. The public, I think it's hard a conversation to have, to try and explain to someone the things that impact your job when your job seems so glorious
Yeah.
and at times easy to the public. When you say like it's really not supposed to be 8-hour workdays, straight 8-hour workdays for talent, or 8 hours in general,
Yeah.
on camera, and they're like, well, I do 8 hours at work, and it's like,
Yeah.
there is a difference. It's really hard to explain, but
It's just talking. Why is it so hard?
Yeah, exactly. But it even gets hard to explain to some of the people who are working the same event, right? So some of the program managers, talent
Yeah.
managers. Yeah, I guess, how have you handled those types of problems, where the talent manager can't get you anything that you need, and no one seems to really be wanting to hear any of your seemingly minor complaints. Again, like, can we have some apples in the green room?
Yeah.
How do you handle all of that? How do you not let it affect your mood, actually, is one of my my personal big questions.
Oh my gosh. Especially food. It's so hard. Food affects my mood so much. And I can instantly turn hangry diva. So I have to be really careful. Part of it is just I mitigate those circumstances by I always have food with me now. Like I always carry a Cliff Bar and a fruit leather, like always. And a green tea bag, because believe it or not, it's hard to get green tea in a lot of places. So mitigate it. Also, I'll say, I mean, I'm a huge communication nerd, so communication science was my major, like I said. And there is a lot of really good information out there about just like how to communicate well and how to use your communication skills to your benefit. So, two of my favorite books, if anyone is interested, that I think read really well, like novels almost, is one is called Crucial Conversations, and it's about how to have really difficult conflictual conversations in a way that feels good for both parties. And then one is called Leadership and Self-Deception: Getting Outside the Box, which is a very unwieldy title, but really helps you evaluate how you speak based on like empathizing with other people and trying to find common ground before you engage over conflict. And I just started one called Nonviolent Communication, which is really similar as well. That has to do with, that one's a little bit more on the wee woo, like radical compassion side, which I'm really into, but might not resonate with other people. So all of that is to say, I think that common ground is often the most compelling thing you have at your disposal in communication. So a lot of times where I'll start is like, hey, I know you need me to be on stage for another 4 hours and I'm exhausted because I haven't had any food. So I want to give you the best broadcast I can, and it'll be really helpful for me to do that if you can find me some protein. Like, that kind of let's work together to solve this problem thing is usually really effective.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes they're like, I'm sorry, I can't.
Yeah.
And then at least you said your piece so that if you really suck for 4 hours, then they know why.
Right. It just, at the end of the day, I think it sucks because the audience isn't going to know why. You're not going to go up on that stage and be like,
Mm-hmm.
look, guys, I haven't food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bear with me. Uh, some of the real difficult things about this job for sure.
Yeah, because you can't just leave. Like,
Yeah.
actually, recently, the first time in my whole career where I was like, I have to set a point of time where I'm going to walk off stage, because I've literally been on stage, like, I think I had been on stage 16 hours or something. And I was like, if it gets to midnight and we don't have an end time in sight, I'm going to leave. Like, I'm just
Wow.
going to walk off.
Yeah.
And luckily, we got to midnight and I was like, okay, I can see that we're closing in 10 minutes. So I will leave. But it was like,
That's
yeah.
insane. That's insane.
So you have to set boundaries too. Like,
Yes, yes, you
sometimes.
do. It's again on one of those things where I talk to people who are more in the big boy industry, and I even actually, what's interesting? I talked to like behind the scenes people, production for the Burbank studio work that we did, and they were like unionized, so they were
Yeah.
like, after 8 hours we're out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was like, oh, geez, okay.
Yeah.
What that is.
Yeah.
But it's not quite made its way over into many esports, even the bigger esports. Even CS:GO, I think, still deals with this type of stuff, even if they're treated maybe overall a bit better.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I do
Yeah,
want
you
to,
were asking about comparing it to the
yeah,
entertainment industry. And I do think there's a part of me that loves how there's still that let's work together and be scrappy to make this esports thing happen. And I like that flexibility and I like that team element. But there is that feeling of like, oh yeah, the industry that has been doing the same thing for a long time recognizes that you shouldn't work more than this many hours doing this thing. So how do we balance that?
yes, yeah, exactly. I guess that is usually the easiest thing I can compare to, but then it gets kind of iffy when they're like, "Well, I don't think Brad Pitt works that hard either," and I'm like, "Oh well, I don't know." Okay, well, fair enough.
Yes,
Uh,
and Brad and I are very close.
yes, yes, indeed. So I want to spend some of unfortunately, the last few minutes here on the podcast just to breeze on by here,
Yeah,
by
that went
asking
so
you,
fast.
yeah, right? By asking you some, I guess, like finer detail points, right? I know
Sure.
we haven't gotten into so much that you have done, which really makes me sad, but to hone in on some of the things that you've learned in your career, what are some of the big things that you see from on-screen talent for hosting jobs? We'll start with that. So like stage hosting that are done incorrectly that really point to a novice doing the work.
Ooh, what do people do incorrectly? Well, zooming way, way out in terms of hosting as a career, I think one of the toughest things about it is the mental and emotional aspect of gig work that is extremely reliant on an industry that is extremely unstable. And by unstable, I mean if you're working on a game, who knows how long that game will be popular, who knows how long the developer will fund it, there's so much unknown. So it can be really, really taxing if you can't keep the hope up of like, all right, I'm not working right now. So that gives me the opportunity to rest and practice. And that's part of my job. And then when I'm working, I'm working. And it's okay that I'm not
Mm,
working all the time. And I say this as someone who's been working in this industry, like, I don't know, 11 years or something. And I still have freakouts of like, I'm never going to work again. No one's ever going to hire me ever again.
oh my gosh.
So easier said than done. But I think that intentionally setting up that mental fortress, if you will, of like, I expect this is how it's going to be. And I can celebrate that this is how the work goes. I think often the mistakes I see in hosting have to do with not listening, which is strange to say because as a host, you're mostly focused on talking. But listening and then giving yourself time to think, I think, is another one. During the show, I did this actually. You asked me a question that I didn't immediately know the answer to, and usually the response, as someone who's on camera, is like, I just have to make sounds until something comes to me. But taking the time to just count to 3 and take a deep breath and think is a very normal human thing to do. So, allowing yourself to just be like, huh. Well, and that to me feels like an eternity, but to you is like, oh, that's a normal amount of time to think about something. Um, and then I think also along those same lines, exercising your humanity as a host is really helpful in 2 ways. One, that you can talk someone through your thought process as you have it, and that makes them feel very connected to you. It makes them see why you're kind of going all over the place and trying to figure out what to say. And also because like we talked about, the connection with the audience is so important. I think one of the things that I had to work on early on in my career is that I wasn't getting hired for a lot of stuff because people were like, you're too formal, like you're too professional, you're very straight laced, like you're good for this kind of very formal thing where we have you in a dress and you're being very grand, but like if we want a couch where we're discussing video games, like you're too stuffy.
Huh.
And that was just because all of my training was pageantry and like, I'm very, I'm a communication scholar. So having to humanize myself and remember that people want to see a person with characteristics they can relate to was another really important piece.
It's fascinating. I don't remember that being a public criticism anyways of you. So
It's really easy for me, like everyone was criticizing this and it's like one person on Reddit and like one person that I asked why I didn't get a job, but
sure, yeah.
I saw it in my own work.
Yeah, but I think it is an important point. I think that there are examples of inauthenticity. I mean, especially when we talk about people that came over from entertainment into esports. And you kind of did, even though you were like homegrown video gamer, all that, good stuff. So that is interesting.
I think also that points to another thing that I would tell for hosts and talent in general to do is I spent so much time asking people why they didn't give me jobs because I wanted to improve. So what I would do is I'd be like, I'm interested in this job. And then someone would be like, I'm sorry, we went a different direction. And I would be like, totally understand. I would love to be someone that you would want to hire in the future. Is there any specific feedback you can give me that would make me a more desirable hire for you in the future? And usually it was really easy for them to give me something that was either going to help me improve or would kind of assuage my panic, being like, oh no, it was nothing to do with you. Just this person has this reason why we needed to work with them. Or, you are really formal. Maybe try being a little more loose, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. First I have to actually handle feedback and process feedback very well.
Yeah, true.
A skill to work on.
It's a delicate thing to do. I wouldn't say like, just be like, well, how come you didn't give me the job? Like, very different.
Yeah. Actually, I've had a lot of problems. Well, not me personally. Honestly, I'm very bad about that type of stuff. But I've had people I know who are very good about that. And their problem is actually they don't get feedback. They are very reasonable in their requests. They are very clear that it's not bad or whatever. And they just never get any response.
Yeah, that's tough too.
Yeah. So don't know what to do with that, but I think just if you are the type of person who's really always looking for feedback very earnestly, authentically, and I think just going to other people actually still helps, is my perspective anyway. So yes, it still comes down to the person who is ultimately pressing the hire button, but
I like that. Hire.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it works, right?
Yeah. That's what I had as a producer. I just had this big button.
Not like 6 other people that you had to check with and like billing department. Like, God. Some of that stuff. And then the last question is going to be the Patreon question from Barrett. So what is the best piece of advice you've given someone?
Like in general, in life?
I guess so. That's
wow.
It's not specified. So I guess kind of like if you can think of a piece of advice that maybe later on they were like, that was fantastic, that helped me, that changed my life. That would be what he's looking for.
I'll give you the first one that comes to my mind that is host and interview related.
Okay.
And then the second one that comes to mind that is a little more like life and love related. The first one that came to mind when you asked me that is that actually one of the hardest things to do when you're being interviewed or speaking publicly is if someone asks you a question and you go completely blank and you have no answer, because that's what happens to me when something too big is asked. Like your favorite anything, I'm like,
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Like I have to write a list and list the pros and cons. And if I commit to my favorite, I'll never be able to change it. And I just freak out. So the most important piece of advice you ever gave someone is like, I don't remember any advice I gave anyone ever. But in that situation, my advice is first do that deep breath count to 3 thing, then talk people through your thought process and explain to them if you don't have an answer, why you don't have an answer, which is what I just did.
Yeah.
And that actually won me a couple interview awards in pageants because I just was like, that's a really, really hard question that nobody's going to be able to answer on stage. And here's why.
Or you just answer everything with world peace. That's what I learned from
Yeah,
Jamie Allen.
I want world peace. And then I think the best thing, I'm gonna leave it at that. You know what? Because I think that otherwise I'll leave you with just a grand like, listen to your heart and set boundaries. That it sounds really cloying, but it's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of funny though, because I would say the first one helps really with people who, and I think generally people do this, they think large and then get small. That's basically how it works. But no, there's definitely people who think small and then think large. But anyways, I think that helps with those people. But then your second one was actually just like very large and not big. So it's like,
I mean, if we want to have a whole podcast about listening to yourself and setting boundaries, like I can talk about that for sure. But
there you go.
You can just take that and, do with it what you will, Patreon friend.
Well, take some from the actual podcast itself, right? Where you were talking about actually adding in a broadcast, making sure to set boundaries, but making sure that you have your moments to yourself and you have the end time. Like it's kind of still connected. That's what we were doing here.
Oh, here's a related thing I think that is more specific. That always being kind is definitely accomplishable and good, and that sometimes being kind doesn't mean being nice.
Ah, yes. There you go. It's the only thing I've ever learned from a commercial is the kind bars. And it was actually that is kind of pretty poignant. I appreciate this. That is nice.
Did a kind commercial say that?
Yeah,
sometimes
they said that there's a difference
nice?
between being kind and nice.
Really?
Yes,
wow.
yes, yeah.
See, you don't need my advice. Just watch TV.
I got a commercial. It works. Commercials are good for the general public. No, definitely not. But anyways, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your life advice as well as interview tidbits. It's been fascinating talking to you. I mentioned you're going to be Pokemon Worlds. It's released in about a month actually. So what are you doing? Where are you going to be? All that stuff.
In about a month, I will have just finished being on stage with Acquisitions Incorporated at PAX West. So if it's before Sunday the 4th of September, then watch Acquisitions Incorporated at 8:30 p.m. Pacific. If it's not, go back and watch the VOD, because that's our costume Dungeons and Dragons game that we play with the creators of Penny Arcade, and Dungeons and Dragons is really fun. And otherwise, who knows what other stuff I'm going to be doing. Oh, I'm going to be doing a Magic the Gathering event in Las Vegas at the end of October.
Ooh.
So check that out. And then if I have been hired for anything since this was recorded, you can find it out on my social media at Anna Prosser or my website, annaprosser.com.
There you go. That works. Thank you again for coming on. And to everyone out there who is listening / watching, I guess you guys got to see the puppy, so you guys went out. Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Shane, especially for co-producing this podcast, and Barrett for reaching out, doing a bunch of clips, just all around being a great guy. And then thank you for the people who go above and beyond on the Patreon, patreon.com/zombiegrub. That is Nick, Vinny, Steven, E.T., Ravi, and Cuddle Bunny. Thank you guys so much. I will see you back here for the next episode of Caster Calls with Zombie Grub. Bye-bye.